Good morning, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to this week's Weekly Energy Boost. My name is Elisheva, and I'm here this lovely Monday morning with David, who has been sorely missed for the past few episodes. Weekly Energy Boost is a 7-day spiritual weather forecast where David, myself, and sometimes guests offer our listeners the most powerful and practical wisdom and tools to navigate the coming 7 days. And through the process, we inevitably uncover powerful wisdom and tools that you can use any day of the year, any week of the year, any time at all. And to me, this week, we really are looking at two different angles. One is being a light, and the other is when we don't feel like it. So, David, where do you want to start?
Well, we were talking a little bit earlier about the energy of this week, and one of the portals that are available for us is this idea of second chances. And a lot of times people don't realize that when they fall or they make a mistake or they hurt someone, all the different things that we often get hard on ourselves for, this process is often being forced by the Creator in order for us to actually start a new spiritual journey. People are so focused on the mistake that they make or the relapse that they had. They don't realize that after the fact, we have to realize that that falling was a forced falling, because there are lessons that we need to learn. There are actually emotions and feelings that come up after we fall, and that's the test that we need to pass. It's not the falling that actually occurred. So for example, the biggest way that the negative side will attack a person is a mistake will happen that will be a 3-second mistake. Something you said, something you did, an addiction you fell to. But then there's this guilt that ensues for days, weeks, and people sometimes hold on to this for a lifetime. You have to realize that every moment that when you have guilt or shame and you're beating yourself up, or it's this thing that even you suppress and you push to some part of your body, but it lingers. Every moment of that is a disconnection from the light in its own way. So it's almost like a 3-second mistake is now giving offspring to a lifetime of a disconnection. So this is the week that we have the ability to go back in time and realize that the mistakes were never mistakes, but they were opportunities in order to elevate the sparks of light. So people should actually start to think about, most likely whatever area of your life feels stuck or feels blocked, and often this happens in relationships and the people that we're closest to, it means that we're still holding on to some kind of either ourselves guilt or grudge for another human. And that's causing the energy to be blocked. And this is the week that we can unblock the energy.
Okay, I hear you, and I'm trying to listen through public lenses, public filters. What difference does it make if I'm sitting in my living room and I'm feeling guilty? Or, I'm at work, but I'm distracted by the idiot I was yesterday when I said what I said, and I'm overthinking it and rehashing it over. Like, why does it make a difference if I'm stuck in that space or not? So,
and this is common amongst all people who succeed in any area of life. So if it's their career, or it's athletics, or as a parent, success comes from where your consciousness is at. So we talk about in Kabbalah, consciousness is defined as the energy we put out into the world through our thoughts, our words, and our actions. That's what's determining my consciousness. And there's a whole spectrum of good consciousness, powerful consciousness, as we call the consciousness of the light of the Creator. And at the bottom of this spectrum, it would be negative consciousness, a low vibration consciousness. And many people talk about this. To the extent that throughout the day, we can keep our consciousness at a high level, one of certainty, one of compassion, one of fortitude and grit, and seeing, for example, when you walk into the room and you see the good as opposed to seeing the bad, you have now elevated your consciousness. And we all know this intellectually, but to be able to actually hold your consciousness in what we call the tree of life is what taps you into this portal of miracles. There's a reason why someone who's good at something is most likely good at everything, because it's not this talent necessarily that they have. It's the fact that they have a level of consciousness that you can apply to so many different areas of life. And I always get fascinated by people who are very tier one type of operators, let's say in the Army or in the Navy. You know, the SEALs or the Green Berets, and when they leave the I guess it's called the public sector to go into the private and to maybe start their own businesses, they actually create very successful businesses, because what they've been molded to as these tier one operators is to have a level of consciousness that is fearless, that has an incredible work ethic, that overrides their feelings. And we learn in Kabbalah, if you're always responding to the way you feel, you're essentially living in the world of the negative side. So how do you rise above the five senses? For example, if someone says something and it makes you feel a certain way, it doesn't mean the fact that you listen to it and the fact that you allow that to control how you feel, you're already lost to the negative side. And so we have to rise above the five senses. We have to rise above what we hear, what we feel, what we see. These are all illusions. They're all tests that are happening. So to what you were saying, it's our consciousness throughout the day that is ultimately going to determine the miracles that we have in our lives.
As a Kabbalah teacher, I hear you. I'm walking the walk and talking the talk as best I can. But as a Pisces, and we're in the month of Pisces, which is, I think, where when we're not feeling it angle comes in.
Yes.
What is the line between honoring my feelings, right? Being real, being in touch with myself, not denying or suppressing any emotional surfacing, and at the same time, embodying that strong consciousness that you're talking about. I'm a human being. I want to be a superhuman, let's start with. I want to be that Navy SEAL mentality that can tackle anything and handle anything, but I feel bad now. How would you reconcile that? Or what do you tell people when they're in that space? One of
the best lessons I've learned from one of a teacher that we both share, one of our colleagues who I know that we often go to when we were looking for spiritual advice or there are challenges. He would tell me that, he would say, before we even deal with the problem or try to solve the problem, let's make sure that we're feeling the pain and feeling all the feelings and not escaping the process. So it's interesting because what I learned from that, and it's something that we implement with our own students, and I think everyone who's listening to us, this is a spiritual technology that we should apply to everyone, to our kids, to our relationships, to our loved ones. We have to first get all the facts on the table, get all the feelings on the table. It's very important that you're aware of all the feelings that you feel, and not to suppress them, not to escape from them, not to deny them, but to actually write them down, take note of them. Whatever you don't know, you cannot, it's like you cannot grow what you cannot measure. So it's very important that you understand all your feelings and to feel them. And this was the first piece of advice that our colleague would give me all the time. And he said, look, first off, before we even talk about solutions of elevating your consciousness, we need to know what we're elevating from. So let's feel everything. So the idea is, like, many times this happens, we'll have incredible days and we'll feel amazing even from the beginning of the day. And we'll feel certainty and excitement and passion about things that we're doing, and we're very optimistic. And then there's those days, for no reason at all, where you feel confused and disconnected and not yourself. And it almost seems like nothing even precipitated that. There's nothing caused that, but it is just what it is. In those times, I tell myself, okay, what am I feeling right now? Let's not escape that, because these feelings are coming from the Creator for a reason. There's a process I must go through. Now that I'm feeling it, what can I do to rise above it knowing that these feelings are only causing me to be a black hole in this world. It's lowering my consciousness. I'm not accessing the tree of life. Because whatever your negative quality is, that's the gateway and portal to your greatest gifts. If a person wants to know where their soulmate doesn't live somewhere. Their soulmate lives through the gate of their most negative trait. So as you don't decide not to escape it, but to go through it, and you're deciding to go through it because you know it's really an illusion. I'm not afraid of it. I'm going to process it. I'm going to talk to people about it. I gave this homework assignment to someone recently. That I know that there's people who might feel a certain way about them. So go talk to them. Hear what they have to say. Hear the examples they have. Hear the stories they have. It's a very powerful thing to do because even when we try to be spiritual on our own, we can't use our ego to overcome our ego. It's very deceptive. We need to go to other people and hear what they have to say. So
for me, when I get into that, I have a day like that where I'm just off and I know it and I'm watching it, but at the same time, I'm a little bit stuck in it. What helps me is to talk about it, to go to somebody that I know doesn't judge me, trusts, I can trust unconditionally, and to air it out. Because many times in voicing it, the illusion of it or the temporary nature of it becomes more concrete. Like when it's swimming in your head, it's very hard to see the forest from the trees. Yep. But as you articulate it, and even when I find myself sometimes saying, I know it sounds ridiculous, or I know it's an illusion, but the fact that I'm letting it out of myself, like it's a process of consciously separating myself from the darkness. It's not me. It's something that's entered my movie, maybe because of seeds that I planted in a previous scene in my life that were reactive. So I'm harvesting that fruit right now, or simply because, like you said, on the other side of that process, and this is something I find, I don't know if it's just me, but especially when I'm able to do that with my husband, the end result is that we're closer, and the tendency is, and this is what I think when I hear, I don't feel it, is that there's, of course, the voice that says they're going to judge me. I don't want to seem negative. I don't want to seem pessimistic. I don't want to even give energy to my fears or my worries. But that's actually voicing it, airing it out has the opposite effect. You bring it out into the light. You see it. It's not happening. It's not real. And you can, like you said, then work from there. But you've got to be able to see where you're at. And I think that that's a really helpful tool as well. So if you don't have that kind of person, start by seeking out that kind of person. Sometimes it's a mentor, a teacher. Sometimes it's a spouse or a partner or a close friend or a sibling. But to have that support and that non-judgmental space really makes a big difference in the long run of growing out of those feelings and that stuck feeling.
I recently spoke with newlyweds. I think they just celebrated their first year of being married. And they asked, what's advice that you can give both of us for our first year of marriage? And one of the things I shared this with the man, but equally it applies for the woman as well. I said, make sure your wife isn't suffering silently. And one of the most common things I see in relationship counseling is this fear of sharing feelings and a process for whatever reason.
And looking bad or looking negative or looking selfish.
Right. Afraid of what the other person might think or say. Afraid of also being held to a similar standard. Right. If I'm sharing with you how I feel, and I'm now, as I'm sharing it with you, I'm expecting you to grow from what I'm telling you. I'm also going to be held to a similar standard. And am I ready to do that? Subconsciously, some people aren't. There's also the feeling of maybe, and I told this to the husband, I said, look, your wife most certainly thinks that you probably gaslight her and maybe you've not acknowledged some of the ways she's felt in the past. So you're training her to not share with you. And you're training her to actually maybe speak with other people like her friends and not you. So it's very important that you pull out and extract the feelings that you have from each other. And so it's we live in a generation more than ever where people suffer in a way of silence. And so communication is so key. I've learned that there's several things, right? It's making the space and the time to actually talk. I know a lot of people who need like a warm up. There's like 15, 20 minutes of just talking until they even access the feelings that they really want to talk about. And so it's kind of a fishing expedition. You have to hook and pull out. And once you pull out kind of this fresh stuff, you get some of the older stuff that comes out. So what's important is, this week, especially if we're talking about it, it also means that the energy exists. The people closest to you, it could be your customers, by the way, it could be your employees. I can't tell you how many times I'll just randomly call an employee and be like, what's on your mind? What are you feeling? What are you feeling about your job? What do you feel about your position? What do you feel about your compensation? What do you feel about what's happening with other employees? And it's amazing because these people aren't volunteering this information. Even if they have a manager, even if they have HR, your employees are not sharing 95% of what they feel about you, about the company, about whatever. And almost certainly by pulling that out, you're creating unity, you're creating a higher consciousness, and you're definitely creating a better culture.
I think you can apply that to your family, to your neighbors. It just depends on how deep you want to go with them.
Think about it. All these relationships we have, and we just kind of, most people are like ships in the night. They're not approaching the relationships and being like, hey, it seems like things are good, but let's extract what's lingering under the surface. We go to the dentist. We don't just go when we have pain.
I went to the dentist this week.
You went to the dentist this week, yes. I mean, and you go not because you had pain, I assume. You go because you want to avoid even so the dentist is extracting, right, the what's kind of in its early stages.
Dental cleaning and mental cleaning.
I like that. Dental cleaning.
Who's your mental hygienist?
That's very good.
That's what we do, by the way.
Very good.
That's what we do. And it's so interesting that you say that because earlier this week in a class, we had the Kabbalah 9, last week. And one of the first things we talked about in that class, which to me was a really profound, maybe obvious, but to hear it was really hit in a different way, is that Rav Ashlag, who is the founder of the Kabbalah Centre 100 years ago, wrote to one of his students, I want to hear all the details. Don't use slogans with me. I don't want to hear any wise teachings that you read or you heard. I want to hear how's things with your wife. What negativity are you noticing? How's your work? How much money are you, meaning to get down to it was like almost like I want you to vomit everything out.
Nice.
Because otherwise, how can I see where you're really at and know what's really going on with you?
Nice.
And to hear that from a master teacher, a teacher's teacher, that he wanted to get into the guts of his student, it was a real lesson for me that almost like nothing is insignificant. And that's, to me, it's a big lesson about, being there for other people and lifting people up. Get, like you said, fishing expedition. Like, where is it? What is the nugget that we're searching for that's going to relieve the pain and the suffering, or the diamond that we're searching for in this process? So it was a very, very powerful words to hear from such a sage. So
in summary, we've discussed two things about the energy of this week. Number one is this idea that falling is an inevitable process and it's often forced by the Creator. We learned this from the story of Adam and Eve, that it was a forced falling, without getting into the details, because the evolution of creation needed to happen. So when you fall, after the fact, realize that you were meant to fall, and this is now creating a spiritual process by which you should examine how you feel, examine the emotions that come up, examine the fears that come up, examine the shame that comes up, or the guilt that comes up. Examine how the fact that maybe now you're operating with some sadness or denial or overcompensation. Right? Many times when we fall in one area, we overcompensate. All of these are reactive feelings and emotions that we need to observe, write down, feel, not escape from, but then tell ourselves, okay, for the sake of my relationship with the Creator, for the sake of my relationship with people, and part of our spiritual work is to become like the Creator with the intention of being close to the Creator, which is a whole another concept of intention. It's called lishma. By going through this process, I'm now doing what my soul's purpose is. So we're not denying or suppressing how we feel. We're feeling them, and then we're making a conscious decision to rise above them. And as a result, share with the world and be a light to the world as opposed to a darkness. The second thing that we talked about are the fact that most people are suffering in silence. And so they're not really in touch with how they feel. So we're asking people to communicate, to ask more questions, to go deeper with the people closest to them. We talked about employees. We talked about our loved ones. We talked about spouses. We talked about children. Asking your children how they feel. Right? All of these can sometimes be very uncomfortable processes for people, especially various signs. You want to throw out the signs that you know might have the hardest time with talking about how they feel or confronting other people with their feelings.
Aquarius.
Aquarius
Much?
What is it about the Aquarius? We talk about the Aquarius a lot.
They hover just slightly above the human condition.
the God gene?
They're really expressing their God gene. And I think that it's messy, for and not just for Aquarians, but for a lot of people.
So that's a great word. It's messy.
Getting emotional, getting in the weeds with people, it's messy. Like, who wants to go? I mean, I can tell you in my younger years, if somebody was starting to cry, I ran. Like, just, I can't, you know, it was like there was so much, maybe I was such an emotional person that like an ounce more of emotion was just, I ran for the hills. And I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with seeing somebody be weak and vulnerable. Aquarians specifically, they're very stoic, very aloof. They're not really bothered by much. And it's interesting to see that discomfort come up, even when they're emotional, they feel something to run from it. Then you have the Pisces that's like sort of a mess emotionally quite often.
How so? I feel what you're saying. I want you to be able to elaborate for listeners.
Oh man, do I have to get personal? Because
we're saying that the Pisces feels.
Okay, so what's interesting in Kabbalistic astrology, we don't always have the chance to get into this, but according to Kabbalistic astrology, every sign has an internal energy and an external energy. So as with conventional astrology, there's water signs, earth signs, fire signs, and air signs, but each sign has an internal energy. So when we look at the commonalities, right? There's also a commonality between the signs that have that same internal energy. And Pisces have an inner energy of air.
Oh, okay, that's right.
So
it's the central column. It's the central
column of the water sign. Yep. So on one hand, they're more balanced, but on the other hand, they're also a little bit, I think of like sparkling water, like a little bit all over the place.
Sparkling water.
Sparkling seltzer.
Well said.
Seltzer water. So why is that important? Because it's almost like that effervescence. It's almost like a little bit of a shallowness.
I see.
Or a little bit of a superficiality.
I see. There's depth, but that's the combination with the shallowness because it's the air of water.
Right.
I see.
So why is that important? Because it can be, they're the sign from the water signs that when the emotions come up, they escape, they run, they medicate, they avoid.
That's right. That's the addictive sign as well.
One of the most addiction-prone signs of the zodiac is Aquarius because it's almost like there's so much.
Pisces, you mean?
Pisces.
Yeah.
There's so much emotion that it's intolerable. It's overwhelming. It's like a flood.
That's good.
So, but in a good sense, and this to me very much ties into this week's energy, is that most of the mistakes, the falling that we do, comes from an inability to tolerate something, discomfort, patience, frustration, right? The story of this week is that a huge group of people became ridiculously impatient and short-circuited, right?
Right.
The sense, and by the way, I don't know if you noticed this in the last few weeks, a lot of people are coming to me with super high levels of anxiety, super high levels of frustration, ready to quit, what's the word? Close the business, leave the marriage. Like it's coming.
Why is that?
I feel it's that I want something and I want it now. So I'm not getting it. The deal is not closing.
So this is the Pisces. You're saying this is the Pisces.
Well, to me, it's more connected to this week's energy of, I don't have the patience to wait. I cannot tolerate this situation any longer.
That's good, everybody. That's good. Whoever's going through something, that's good.
But first of all, it's not you. It's cosmic. That's one thing to remember. But at the same time, to David brought up the Adam and Eve story, that their inability to wait out the process is what caused that. And again, it was meant to be, as was this week's energy is telling us, the falling had to happen, where we're programmed. That I think our teacher Rav Berg used to say, the greatest selfishness is impatience. I want it and I want it now. I don't have the patience for the process. I'm not willing to wait for the other person to expand, develop, meet me where I'm at. I don't want, even when it comes to business matters, things that are significant, that have impact financially and on many people, take time.
Yeah.
And the bigger the deal, the less patience we have for it.
Yep.
So part of this week's energy, and that's why I think that the don't feel it is really the main part of this week's message, is you when you can't take it anymore, keep taking it. Hold out.
Hold the line. Like that scene from Braveheart. Hold the line. hold, and then.
But that's the Navy SEAL programming, right? You're starving, you're soaking wet, you're freezing cold. You
have diarrhea in your pants. Hold the line.
But that's really when we say it's the message of this week, it's also the gift of this week. The gift, though, is not going to be given to you in a pack of chocolates. You're going to see the opportunities to be impatient, to grab instant gratification, to throw things away because you can't stand it anymore. And this is the week to really, like you said, hold your ground, bear down. You can handle it. It's almost over. Don't give in now when what's coming is just on the horizon.
Beautiful.
Woo. This might be one you want to hear multiple times.
Yeah, a lot to unpack on this one.
A lot to unpack, short and sweet, but really powerful stuff. As always, the Weekly Energy Boost is available on all podcast platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We have a website, weeklyenergyboost.com, where you can find out more about what we're interested in, what we think is important for our listeners, and some information about our guests as well. You can also click the donate button at weeklyenergyboost.com to support us. But really, the number one way you can support us is by sharing this episode, liking, rating, reviewing. The more you do that, the more eyes we catch and the more ears we catch. And we thank you for continuing to share and help us do this work. Have a fabulous week, and we'll see you next time on the Weekly Energy Boost.